They took my car. My car. Like I was invisible, a non-entity. I swallowed the resentment, biting my tongue until I tasted blood. What else could I do? Mom, sweet Linda, was no ally. She floated along, a sea anemone attached to their reef of awful behavior. That's just how they are, she'd sigh, her go-to phrase, a pathetic absolution for their sins. It wasn't just about the car, it was about everything. Alan's sense of entitlement was ancient, practically geological. He believed the world owed him a debt and children were just another way to collect. I remember him telling me, almost bragging, that his parents never denied him anything. If he wanted it, he got it. That's how a family should be, he'd proclaim, which really translated to, everyone does what I want or else face my displeasure. And Jason? Jason was Alan 2.0, younger, cockier, a miniature gargoyle perched on Alan's shoulder. He amplified everything Alan said, a sycophantic echo. He didn't just inherit the entitlement gene, he weaponized it. He'd mock me relentlessly for being too sensitive whenever I dared to stand up for myself. If Alan decided to borrow my things, which meant permanently confiscating them, Jason would guffaw and tell me to quit being so dramatic. They were a tag team of torment, constantly chipping away at my sanity. I lost count of the times they simply assumed my belongings were communal property. I remember slaving away weeks of part-time work to buy a laptop for school. I was so proud of that machine. 48 hours after I brought it home, Jason casually appropriated it, installing a barrage of games without a second thought. When I demanded it back, he sneered, "Chill out, you weren't even using it." Alan, naturally, added his 2 cents, "He's your brother, let him borrow it." Borrow? It became Jason's personal gaming rig, perpetually smudged with greasy fingerprints. This was my reality. Alan took, Jason defended, and Linda excused. Nobody ever stood in my corner. So, I learned to hide my treasures to make them untouchable. By 18, I knew I had to escape. The air in that house was thick with their suffocating expectations. Every day was a stark reminder that nothing was truly mine, not my possessions, not my time, not even a shred of peace. I started squirreling away every spare cent I earned at the local hardware store. This is how I got my car, a beat-up 1998 Honda Accord. It was a testament to neglect, rust blossoming on its flanks, a cracked tail light, and an engine that wheezed like a chain smoker. But it was mine. I poured every available resource into fixing it up. Every paycheck was funneled into parts, new tires, a much-needed tune-up, a replacement battery. I wasn't just repairing a car, I was meticulously crafting my getaway vehicle. Of course, Alan and Jason didn't grasp any of this. To them, the Accord wasn't my painstakingly earned ticket to freedom, it was just another toy to be used and abused at their whim. I tried to establish boundaries, to assert ownership, but my pleas landed on deaf ears. Jason took it without asking the first time. I came home from my shift and it was gone. Panic clawed at my throat. I started calling everyone I knew, frantic, only for Jason to saunter in hours later, completely nonchalant. He tossed me the keys, a dismissive gesture. "Relax," he said, "I just took it for a spin." Alan, predictably, chimed in, "It's just a car. Don't make such a fuss." Things escalated quickly after that. It became a recurring nightmare. I'd turn around and the car would be missing again. They rarely even asked. I'd drag myself in after a grueling shift only to discover they'd been using my car for God knows what. Then one day, they returned it with this massive dent on the side. Something in me snapped. What the hell happened to my car? I remember yelling, the exhaustion and frustration finally boiling over. Jason just nonchalantly shrugged. "It's an old heap. Who cares?" Alan, playing peacemaker as always, chimed in with, "You should be grateful we even brought it back." That's when I decided I had enough and began hiding the keys. I refused to let them wreck the only thing I truly owned, but of course, hiding the keys just fueled their determination. I remember one night, I woke to the sound of Jason rifling through my room, searching for them. When I caught him red-handed, he just laughed, like it was all some big joke, and said, "Don't be so paranoid." The ultimate breaking point arrived one morning when I woke up and my car was gone, again. This time, they had coordinated like a well-oiled machine. Alan had somehow found the spare key, one I didn't even know they knew existed, and he and Jason had taken off in my car for one of their infamous joyrides. Completely out of options, I called the cops. Hours later, I received a call from the police. Alan had been pulled over for speeding, and Jason was in the passenger seat, laughing about the whole ordeal. When I went to pick up the car, Alan actually had the audacity to lecture me. "If you weren't so selfish, we wouldn't have to do this," he said with a straight face. "Are you serious?" I snapped, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You stole my car." When we got back to the house, Alan set me down in the living room, his tone somber, and dropped the bomb. If you can't handle living under my roof, then you're out. You have 2 weeks to pack your stuff. Jason was sitting in the corner smirking like he had just won some kind of prize or pulled some genius move. Good luck out there, he said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. Honestly, getting kicked out wasn't even the worst part. I mean, sure, it stung, it felt like a slap in the face, but deep down, I think I had seen it coming for a while. Alan always needed to be in control, to have the last word, and Jason just thrived on chaos and drama. What really got under my skin, what truly pushed me over the edge, was how smug they both were about it, like they genuinely believed they were teaching me some sort of lesson. That first night, I just lay on my bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head, wondering how my life had led me to this point. All I ever wanted was to have something that was mine, something they couldn't touch, couldn't take, couldn't ruin. That stupid old Honda Accord was supposed to be my ticket to freedom, my escape from their constant drama, and now, not only had they wrecked it, but I was being thrown out on my ass with absolutely nowhere to go. The next morning, I went out to inspect the car. It was sitting there in the driveway like nothing had even happened, but it felt tainted, different. I walked around it slowly, running my hand along the damaged side. The dent Jason had put in it was still there, glaring back at me like a constant reminder of every boundary they had trampled on. The interior reeked of stale fast food and sweat. They had left trash strewn across the back seat, empty soda cans, crumpled up wrappers, half-eaten bags of chips. My car, the one thing I had actually worked hard for, had been turned into their personal garbage can. I started cleaning it out, muttering under my breath the entire time. Selfish? Really? I'm the selfish one? Every piece of trash I threw away felt like I was discarding a piece of their ridiculous entitlement. It didn't really make me feel any better, though. The damage was done, both to the car and to my spirit. As I was wiping down the dashboard, Alan sauntered out onto the porch with his coffee, acting like he owned the entire world. Well, technically he did, but you know what I mean. He leaned against the railing, watching me with this expectant look, like he was waiting for me to break down or something. Finally, he said, "So, what's your plan, genius?" I didn't even bother to look at him. "What's it to you?" He laughed, a loud, booming sound like I had just said the funniest thing in the world. "Do you honestly think you can survive out there without us?" "Good luck," Jason drawled, stepping out of the house, shirtless and nonchalant, a bowl of cereal in his hand as if this were just any other morning. "Yeah, you'll be crawling back here in a month. I'd bet money on it." I clenched my jaw, wanting to bite back, but what would be the point? Their minds were already made up about me. Anything I said would only be twisted, used as ammunition. So, I kept my mouth shut and focused on cleaning the car. Alan, predictably, got bored and wandered back inside, but Jason lingered, leaning against the porch railing like he had nothing better to do than watch me squirm. "You know," he said, crunching on his cereal, "Dad's right. You're going to fail. You just don't have what it takes to make it on your own." I finally met his gaze. For a fleeting second, I considered arguing, trying to make him see things my way, but I quickly realized it would be a waste of breath. Jason wasn't interested in a conversation, he was just trying to provoke me to get under my skin. I slammed the car door shut and marched back inside to pack. Packing was surprisingly emotional. I didn't own much, but each item felt like a small victory, hard-earned, clothes bought with saved tips, books salvaged from the library sales, my tools, each dent and scratch a reminder of a late night spent fixing someone else's mistake. All of it had a story, usually involving me working myself to the bone, only for Alan or Jason to casually dismiss it as insignificant. I crammed everything I could into a couple of worn duffel bags and my trusty toolbox, but it still didn't feel like enough, not nearly enough for what lay ahead. What was I even going to do? I didn't have a real plan. An apartment was out of the question, and I sure as hell wasn't going to beg relatives for a couch, only to be subjected to the same crap from Alan again. But one thing was crystal clear, I wasn't staying here a single second longer than necessary. Loading the car felt like a tangible step towards freedom, even though I had no idea where I was going. I tossed my bags in the back seat and checked the glove compartment. A couple $100. Enough to survive for a little while, but not much longer than that. For a split second, I was tempted to go back inside. Maybe if I swallowed my pride and apologized, for what exactly? For having a backbone? No. I shook my head and started the car. There was nothing left for me here. As I pulled out of the driveway, a strange mix of relief and pure, unadulterated fear washed over me, relief that I was finally escaping their suffocating negativity, but fear of the unknown. Where would I sleep tonight? What if the car broke down? What if they were right and I was deluding myself? I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to clear the chaos in my head. I eventually found myself in the deserted parking lot of a grocery store. I parked far away from everyone, tucked into a dark corner, and just sat there for what seemed like hours. It felt strange, like I was suspended in limbo, caught between the life I was leaving behind and the uncertain future that awaited me. I spent the night in the car, curled up in the driver's seat, using my hoodie as a makeshift pillow. The next morning, I woke up stiff, exhausted, and miserable, but with a renewed sense of resolve. I wasn't going to let Alan and Jason be right about me. I didn't know how, but I was going to prove them wrong. They thought they'd broken me, but they were dead wrong. They were about to see exactly what I was capable of. The idea of a camper struck me seemingly out of nowhere the next day while I was scrolling through my phone, half awake and annoyed at how much my neck hurt from sleeping in the car. I saw a video about tiny homes and laughed at first. Those things were ridiculously fancy and there was no way I could afford the kind of setup. Then I stumbled upon a picture of a fifth-wheel camper. It wasn't pretty, but it had potential, small, portable, and most importantly, affordable. That's when it struck me, a camper wasn't just a place to sleep, it represented true freedom. I became consumed with online listings for the next few days. It was all I could think about. Every break at work, every red light in the car, I was glued to Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, hunting for something that wouldn't completely empty my savings. So many were ridiculously overpriced, $20,000 for something that looked like it belonged on TV. Then I saw it, a 2001 Keystone Cougar fifth wheel. The pictures weren't great, but I could tell it had potential. Old enough to be cheap, but solid enough to last. The seller, Sam, wanted $3,500, which was a stretch for me, but I was sure I could negotiate. A few days later, I was driving out to Sam's property, about 45 minutes from where I was currently parked. "The Cougar's over here," he said, leading me around the side of the house. And there it was, sitting on a patch of overgrown grass like it had been abandoned. The paint was faded and it had a few dents, but it seemed structurally sound. "She's a little rough," Sam said, "but the plumbing works and the roof doesn't leak. The tires are new though." I circled it, scrutinizing everything. The inside wasn't impressive, cramped and outdated, with peeling wallpaper and a slight musty odor. But it had what I needed, a small kitchenette, a bathroom, and enough room for a bed. "How flexible are you on the price?" I asked, trying to sound confident while my stomach churned. Sam scratched his chin, considering. "Tell you what, if you can get it out of here this week, I'll take it down to $3,000. It was still a lot of money, but I couldn't refuse. "Deal," I said, shaking his hand. The next challenge was figuring out how to move it. My Honda wasn't going to cut it, so I called my cousin Ethan. He was one of the few family members who wasn't completely caught up in my dad's drama. Ethan always had a solution, usually involving tools, a truck, or both. When I told him about my plan, he didn't hesitate. "Bring your car over and we'll figure it out." Ethan's place was about 20 minutes outside town on a large piece of land filled with his collection of old trucks and project cars. He'd been working on cars since high school and his garage was a mechanic's paradise. When I pulled into the driveway, he was already outside wiping his hands on a rag. "So, you're really doing this?" he said, grinning as he leaned against the hood of his truck. "Yeah," I said. "I have to leave. This is the only way I can afford to have my own place." He nodded like he understood completely. "All right, let's see what you've got." We spent the afternoon rigging his truck to tow the camper. Ethan had a talent for making things work, even if it meant bending the rules a bit. By the time we were done, his truck was ready to haul, and I actually started to believe this might happen. "You can park it here if you want," Ethan offered as we finished up. "I have plenty of room, and it's not like your dad is going to show up here." "Thanks," I said, relieved. "I owe you so much." The next day, we drove to Sam's place to pick up the camper. Towing it back to Ethan's property was nerve-wracking. I kept checking the mirrors, bracing for something to go wrong, but we made it without any problems. The first night in the camper felt strange. It wasn't luxurious, not even close. I slept on a musty old mattress, surrounded by peeling wallpaper and a leaky tiny sink that needed to be turned off just so. Over the next few days, I began fixing it up. I cleaned every surface, patched a small hole in the floor, and added some cheap string lights I found at the dollar store. Ethan helped me connect a water supply, and I even found a used propane tank for the stove. It wasn't much, but it was starting to feel like my own space. I thought moving would bring me some peace, but of course Alan and Jason couldn't leave me alone. I hadn't told them where I was parked, but information has a way of spreading quickly within my family. Someone must have mentioned my camper setup to them, probably in what they thought was casual conversation. Before I knew it, they were meddling again. A couple of days later, as I was working to repair a section of the camper roof, Ethan called out, pointing towards the driveway, "You got company?" I carefully climbed down the ladder, and there it was, Alan's beat-up truck with Jason riding in the passenger seat, pulling up. Wonderful, I mumbled under my breath, wiping my greasy hands on my jeans. What could they possibly want now? Alan emerged from the truck first, acting as if he owned the entire property. Jason followed, wearing that infuriating, self-satisfied smirk he always seemed to have plastered on his face. They didn't even bother with a simple greeting. Alan simply marched directly towards the camper, scrutinizing it as if he were a property assessor. A very cozy situation you have here, he said, his tone laced with insincerity. It looks like it could use some attention, though. Are you even keeping up with regular maintenance? What is it you want, Dad? I asked, crossing my arms tightly across my chest. Alan offered a smile, but it felt cold and calculating, not remotely warm or friendly. We've been discussing things and we believe it's time you demonstrated a bit of gratitude. Allow us to take the camper for a weekend. It's not as if you're doing anything truly important with it. Before I could even form a response, Jason jumped in, adding, yeah, it's just sitting here anyway. You can surely manage without it for a couple of days. I could feel my blood rising, my heart pounding harder in my chest, but I forced myself to take a slow, deep breath before answering. No, absolutely not. This is my home. I am not lending it to you or anyone. Alan's expression instantly turned hard and steely. You're being completely unreasonable. We are family, aren't we? Families are supposed to help each other out. It's interesting how selective that principle is, I retorted, unable to bite back my resentment. Because the only time you seem to want to offer help is when it somehow benefits you directly. Jason rolled his eyes dramatically. Oh, here we go. Always playing the victim, aren't you? Always the one who suffers, according to you. I deliberately ignored Jason, fixing my gaze on Alan. You've already taken more than enough from me. The answer is no. Absolutely not. Ethan, who had been observing from a distance, apparently decided he had heard enough. He walked over and positioned himself beside me, mirroring my stance by crossing his own arms. You heard her, Ethan said firmly. No means no. It's really simple. Alan glared at Ethan as if he were some kind of disloyal turncoat. This does not concern you in any way. Ethan smirked slightly. Actually, it does when you're standing on my property. For a fleeting moment, I thought Alan was going to completely explode with anger, but instead, he just shook his head slowly, muttering under his breath, unbelievable. He turned to Jason. Let's go. We're leaving. You're going to seriously regret this decision, he said pointedly as they finally drove off, kicking up dust and gravel as they sped away. I desperately wish I could say that was the end of the ordeal, but of course, predictably, it was not. A few days later, my phone started blowing up with calls and texts from various family members. Alan and Jason had been working overtime, spinning their carefully crafted version of the story. According to their narrative, I was being incredibly selfish and shockingly ungrateful, callously refusing to help out my poor, dear father who merely wanted a relaxing weekend getaway. Why can't you just let him borrow it? One of my aunts asked during a phone call, her voice dripping with judgment. It's not like you're actually using it for anything particularly important. It's my home, I repeated wearily for what felt like the 100th time. Would you casually let someone just take your entire house for the weekend? That's not even remotely the same thing, she countered, her tone rising in frustration. He's your father, for goodness sake. Exactly, I said, feeling the familiar sting of resentment. That is precisely the problem here. The calls just didn't stop. Everyone, it seemed, had an opinion on the matter, and the vast majority of those opinions were decidedly not on my side. I eventually reached a point where I just started completely ignoring my phone altogether, letting the calls go straight to voicemail. Ethan tried his best to cheer me up, attempting to lighten the mood by joking about how Alan and Jason were behaving like stereotypical villains from some awful B-movie, constantly plotting and scheming their next move. It was mildly funny at first, but the relentless, constant pressure from all sides was starting to wear me down, chipping away at my resolve. The breaking point finally arrived when they showed up yet again. I was sitting outside the camper, savoring a rare moment of peace and quiet when I heard the unmistakable rumble of their truck coming up the driveway. I groaned inwardly, burying my face in my hands. You have got to be kidding me. Alan didn't even bother with the slightest pretense of politeness. He hopped out of the truck and pointed a finger at the camper. We're taking it, he stated, like it was a done deal. I pushed myself to my feet. Like hell you are. Jason leaned against the side of the truck, that infuriating smirk plastered across his face. We thought we'd give you a chance to be reasonable, but I guess you're just too damn stubborn. Ethan emerged from the garage, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. They're not taking anything, he said, his voice even, but with an undercurrent of steel. Unless you want me to call the cops. That finally caught Alan's attention. You wouldn't dare, he said, his voice dropping an octave. Ethan didn't even blink. Try me and see. There was a tense standoff where I honestly thought things might escalate into a physical fight, but Alan backed down. He mumbled something under his breath, then climbed back into the truck. Jason gave me a little wave, dripping with sarcasm as they drove off. This isn't over, he called out. I'd hoped that would be the end of it, that Ethan standing up to them would finally make them realize they weren't getting anywhere. How many times did you have to say no before they finally got the message? But Alan and Jason weren't the type to let things go, especially when they felt they'd been disrespected. It wasn't just about the camper for them, it was about power. If they couldn't have what they wanted, they were going to make sure I regretted denying it to them. The next few weeks were surprisingly calm. I even started to relax, maybe even believe they'd finally given up. One evening, Ethan even joked about it while we were working on his truck. You think they're still plotting, or do you think I scared them off for good? He asked, grinning. Probably both, I answered him. Alan's not exactly the forgive and forget type. I should have known better than to think the quiet meant anything good. Turns out they were just biding their time, waiting for the perfect opportunity. It was late, sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning, when I was jolted awake by a noise outside. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the wind. Ethan's property was pretty exposed and the camper would occasionally creak when the breeze picked up. But this wasn't the wind. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, followed by the metallic clink of something hitting the hitch. My stomach lurched. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, my heart hammering against my ribs, and cautiously peeked through the window. And there they were, Alan and Jason, crouched by the hitch, desperately trying to unhook the camper. Alan was struggling with the locks, while Jason held a flashlight, glancing around nervously every few seconds like a kid caught stealing cookies. For a moment, I just stood there, completely frozen in disbelief. I couldn't believe they were actually stooping this low. But then the shock faded and anger took over. This wasn't some stupid disagreement anymore, they were trying to steal my home. I snatched up my phone, threw on a hoodie, and charged out of the camper. What the hell do you think you're doing? I yelled. They both jumped, Alan dropping the tools he'd been using. Jason, ever the smooth talker, tried to play it off with a half-hearted laugh. Relax, man. We were just... Don't even start, I cut him off, my voice shaking. You're trying to steal my camper in the middle of the night. Are you out of your minds? Alan straightened up, dusting off his hands like he hadn't just been caught red-handed. It's not stealing, he said, like that somehow justified it. We're your family. We just wanted to borrow it for a couple of days. You mean steal it? I shot back, my voice rising, because that's exactly what this is. Jason took a step forward, still holding the flashlight. Don't be so dramatic, he said. It's not like we were going to keep it. Alan's face contorted into a sneer. You'd really call the cops on your own father over this? The accusation dripped with disbelief, laced with a hint of what I suspected was guilt. Jason's eye roll was practically theatrical. Oh, here we go. The perpetual victim. Grow up, will you? Grow up. I couldn't help but repeat, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. You're the one skulking around in the dead of night like some common thief. Before either of them could retort, Ethan's porch light snapped on, flooding the yard with a warm glow. The door swung open, and there he was, crowbar in one hand, flashlight in the other. What's going on out here? His voice, though measured, held a definite edge. Alan and Jason both froze, caught like deer in headlights. Alan, ever the charmer, or so he thought, raised his hands in a placating gesture. Just a little family disagreement, he offered smoothly. But I could tell Ethan wasn't buying it for a second. Looks like trespassing to me. Care to explain why you're messing with a camper at this hour? Jason made a move to speak, but Ethan cut him off with a sharp gesture. Save it. You've got 30 seconds to get in that truck and leave, or I'm calling the cops myself. I felt a surge of gratitude for Ethan's intervention. Once they were gone, Ethan turned to me, his expression softening with concern. You okay? Yeah, I managed, though my heart was still hammering against my ribs. Thanks, Ethan. I appreciate you coming out. He nodded, his jaw tight. I figured they'd try something like this sooner or later. You might want to think about adding some extra security, just in case. Already on it, I replied, running a hand through my hair. The night air suddenly felt cold on my skin. This just sealed the deal? The next day, I went into fortress building mode. I bought motion sensor lights that could illuminate the entire yard and heavy-duty locks for every door and window on the camper. I even found a GPS tracker online that I planned to discreetly attach to the undercarriage. If they ever succeeded in moving the camper, I'd know exactly where it went. Ethan helped me install everything, lending his expertise and strength to the task. By the time we were finished, the camper looked less like a home and more like a secure compound. If they come back, they're going to need a damn tow truck, Ethan joked, but I could see the frustration in his eyes mirrored my own. Alan and Jason kept their distance for a while after that, but the sense of security had already been shattered. Every creak and rustle outside made me jump. I started checking the locks obsessively, needing to assure myself I was safe. It wasn't just about protecting the camper anymore, it was about reclaiming that sense of safety, of peace, that they'd stolen from me. The inevitable confrontation finally arrived at the family barbecue. Ethan had generously offered to host it that year, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to connect with some of the less volatile members of the family. I parked the camper on the edge of his property, far enough away to maintain some personal space but close enough to keep it in sight. The afternoon started well. I chatted with a few cousins, played a half-hearted game of cornhole, and even managed a genuine laugh or two. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to believe that we could all just enjoy a normal day, free from family drama. Then Alan showed up. He didn't waste a single second. The moment he saw the camper, his face contorted into a familiar scowl, and he marched straight toward me, Jason trailing behind him with a smug, expectant smirk. "You really brought it here?" Alan boomed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You couldn't let your own father borrow it, but you'll drag it all the way out here to show off?" I sighed inwardly, already exhausted by the prospect of this argument. "It's my home, Dad. I'm allowed to take it wherever I want." "Unbelievable," he said, throwing his hands up in exasperation. "You don't care about family at all, do you?" Jason, of course, couldn't resist adding his 2 cents. "Yeah, real classy, sis. You're making this whole thing about you." By now, a small crowd had gathered, their faces betraying a morbid curiosity. Before I could formulate a response, Chloe, one of my sharper cousins, stepped forward. "Honestly, he's right," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "Maybe it's time you two stop treating her like garbage. This isn't about the camper, it's about control, and everyone here knows it." Alan's face flushed crimson, and Jason looked as though he'd been physically struck. The rest of the family remained silent, a reaction that was probably the wisest course of action. Alan's mumbled complaint about a lack of respect as he stomped off, Jason trailing after him, barely registered. Popularity wasn't on my agenda. What mattered was that someone, finally, had called them out on their behavior, and for once, I wasn't the only one standing up to them. The next morning, the camper found a new home, hitched to Ethan's truck, much closer to his garage. The scenic view by the trees was a loss, but security was the priority now. Ethan was a godsend, helping me install a powerful motion sensor light that bathed the entire driveway in bright light. If Alan and Jason even thought about returning uninvited, they'd be caught in its glare. But I wasn't stopping there. I took the GPS tracker I'd already discreetly installed a step further, configuring an alert system on my phone. Any movement of the camper beyond a minimal radius without my authorization would trigger an instant notification. It wasn't foolproof, but it was a significant improvement over my previous vulnerability. Days passed, and Alan and Jason stayed away, likely deterred by the new security measures and Ethan's watchful presence. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a temporary reprieve. They were the kind to hold grudges, to bide their time, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they tried something else. This wasn't just about the camper anymore, it was about asserting myself, about finally drawing a line. For once, I was determined not to let them bully me or take what was rightfully mine. That night, nestled inside the camper, bathed in the gentle glow of the string lights I'd hung, I felt a strange cocktail of exhaustion and resolve. Let them try. This was my space, my little haven, and I would defend it. A period of uneasy calm settled in. Alan and Jason must have realized their uninvited visits wouldn't work anymore, especially with Ethan ready to intervene at the slightest provocation. But the feeling of impending trouble never really left me. They were master manipulators, always waiting for the opportune moment to strike. That opportunity presented itself when I had to travel for work. It was just a short trip, a couple of days at another branch of my company, but the timing felt ominous. Before leaving, I went over every security measure 3 times. The camper was locked tighter than Fort Knox, the GPS tracker was activated and armed, and Ethan had promised to keep a close watch. I even jokingly requested a personal security detail, to which he responded with a confident smirk, "Don't worry, I'll handle it if they try anything." I wasn't convinced they'd have the nerve to pull anything, not after the trouble they'd already caused. The first night away, my phone buzzed with a notification from the GPS tracker. Initially, I dismissed it as a glitch. Perhaps a gust of wind or some curious animal had triggered a false alarm, but the live location that appeared on my screen made my blood run cold. The camper was in motion. I stared in disbelief. It wasn't just a slight shift, it was speeding down the highway, moving further and further away from Ethan's property. Frantically, I called Ethan. "Hey, did you move the camper?" I asked, my voice trembling. What? No, why? He replied, confusion evident in his tone. Because it's gone, I said, the words laced with a mix of fear and anger. The GPS says it's halfway to town. A stunned silence followed, broken by a muttered curse. That son of a, it has to be your dad. Without hesitating, I called the police. Trying to explain to the dispatcher that my own father had stolen my camper was a surreal experience. I provided proof of ownership, the title, the GPS logs, everything. She assured me that officers would be dispatched to intercept the vehicle and cautioned me against confronting him myself, as if that were even an option given my location. Ethan wasn't waiting for anyone. Send me the GPS location, he instructed. I'm heading out now. I sent him the coordinates and then sat there, glued to my phone, feeling a wave of helplessness and fury wash over me. Alan and Jason had gone too far this time. The audacity. Stealing my car was low, but commandeering my camper? That felt like a deliberate slap in the face, a personal violation. It wasn't long before Ethan, bless his heart, tracked them down. His call came through, laced with a controlled anger I knew he reserved for when my family acted like complete lunatics. They're on Old Mill Road, he reported. I'm hanging back until the police get here. I can see the camper, clear as day. Dad's behind the wheel, Jason's riding shotgun. Figures, I muttered under my breath, more to myself than to him. Just keep them in sight. And please, be careful. I had a bad feeling this was all spiraling out of control. The minutes crawled by until the sirens arrived, a welcome if somewhat jarring sound. Ethan stayed on the line, narrating the unfolding drama like a play-by-play announcer. They pulled Dad over right as he was turning into his driveway. He's arguing with them, Ethan reported, but they're not buying it. He looks mad. A sliver of grim satisfaction pierced through my anxiety. Dad always had a silver tongue, could weasel his way out of anything. But this time? This time he had gone too far, and I was grateful people were actually going to hold him accountable. The call ended with Ethan promising to head back after things calmed down. The next day, after a fitful night, I drove back into town. The news was already circulating. Dad had been arrested. Jason somehow hadn't been charged. I guess because he wasn't driving, but I heard he threw a dramatic fit when they took Dad away. When I went to the police station to give my official statement, I steeled myself for a lecture. Instead, the officer handling the case, a woman with tired eyes but a kind demeanor, surprised me. Are you sure you want to press charges? She asked, her tone surprisingly gentle. He is your father. Yes, I replied, my voice firm, unwavering. He's been steamrolling boundaries my entire life, and I'm done letting him get away with it. This needs to stop. It was hard, but I wasn't changing my mind. A few weeks later, Dad pleaded guilty. He avoided jail, thank God, but faced a hefty fine and a court order to pay restitution for the stolen camper and all the related expenses. The family grapevine buzzed with his outrage, his sense of injustice. Honestly, I didn't care. I'd tuned out his excuses years ago. Jason, predictably, sulked around like I personally wronged him, playing the victim in his father's crime. He even tried calling me, but I sent it straight to voicemail. The rest of the family was, as always, divided. Some thought I was being too harsh, that I should have just let Dad borrow the camper and avoid the unpleasantness. Others, like my cousin Chloe, actually praised me for finally standing up to him. I found, for the first time, that their opinions held little sway. I was finally disentangling myself from their endless drama, and that was all that mattered. With Dad and Jason temporarily sidelined, I decided to finally launch my own escape plan. I'd been squirreling away money, dreaming of this for years, and I finally had enough to make a clean break. Ethan, ever the reliable friend, helped me get the camper road ready. We even installed a few extra security features just in case Dad or Jason decided to retaliate. You're really doing it, huh? Ethan said, his expression a mix of sadness and support as we hooked the camper up to my truck. Yeah, I said, a smile tugging at my lips. It's time. He nodded, squeezing my shoulder. Well, don't be a stranger. And if Alan or Jason pulls any of their usual crap, call me. I'll be there in a heartbeat. I laughed, a genuine, heartfelt laugh. Thanks, Ethan. For everything. Driving away from Ethan's felt surreal. Like I was stepping into a different dimension. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just running from something, the suffocating family dynamics, Dad's constant manipulations, Jason's perpetual victimhood. I was running towards something, freedom, independence, the unknown. I didn't have a detailed itinerary, didn't know exactly where I was headed, and that was perfectly okay. What mattered was that it was my decision, my journey. I spent the first few nights parked at a quiet campsite just outside of town, easing myself into life on the road. It wasn't glamorous, cramped quarters, questionable campsite bathrooms, but it was peaceful. I'd sit outside the camper at night, gazing up at the vast expanse of stars, feeling more at ease than I ever had before. One evening, as I sat by a crackling campfire, I thought about everything that had led me here: Dad, Jason, the endless family squabbles, the unspoken expectations. It all felt distant, almost dreamlike. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was actually living, and I was completely on my own. I had finally done it and cut ties with my parents and brother. It ended there. Or, more accurately, that's where I allowed it to end. For myself, at least. I remember standing there, feeling surprisingly little, actually. A hollow sort of calm had settled over me. All the anxiety, the second-guessing, the obsessive replay of past conversations, it had all just faded. I'd gone into that final meeting expecting a dramatic confrontation, bracing myself for another round of arguments, maybe even hoping for some grand, sweeping gesture that would miraculously fix everything. But there was none of that. Just a quiet, almost anticlimactic acknowledgement that this was it. Over. I think, deep down, I already knew. The signs had been there for months, maybe even longer. Little things that I'd dismissed or rationalized away, moments of disconnect that I'd tried to patch over with forced optimism. But facing it head-on, hearing the words spoken aloud, that was different. It wasn't a shock, exactly, but it was definitive. And in a strange way, that finality brought me a sense of peace. I was finally free from the constant emotional roller coaster. Free from the burden of trying to salvage something that was already broken. Free to move on and build a future for myself, a future that wasn't dependent on someone else's choices or someone else's happiness. It was my closure, not theirs, and that's all that mattered. I walked away not with anger or resentment, but with a quiet determination to embrace the unknown and, finally, to choose myself.